I grew up overseas in an American family, mostly in northern Africa. When I was 15, my parents sent me back to the U.S. to a boarding school to finish my education. This school, this new life, seemed utterly alien to me, sterile and regimented, impersonal and surreal. I missed the noise and smells of the souks and medinas, donkeys braying, adobe walls, and dry, dusty heat. I missed the Bedouin campfires and weekends running wild in the cork forests, where men played boules on the dirt, and fresh breads and foods were piled high on long tables for all to share. This school, with uniforms and endless buzzer bells for silent study halls, had nothing I could touch except in its art room. Here there was color, noise, music, camaraderie, rebellion, and some wildness. Music had always been my natural outlet, but I knew I had to get into that art room, that physical space, and with those people to survive. I taught myself to draw well enough to be accepted into their Art for Credit program, and in senior year I could be there much of the time. I learned that art could feed me and let me sing a song as music had always. I managed to graduate at 17 and went out to Carmel, California to spend the summer with my grandmother and great-aunt Hoodie. It was 1968, and all kinds of things seemed to be happening on the streets, music pouring out of doorways. One evening I walked down to the beach and found a group of travelers, hobos, hippies, sitting around a huge campfire, telling stories and singing songs, drinking plenty of cheap wine. I was captivated by the stories of hopping freight trains, times in prison, escapades, and adventures. They let me in. 3 of the older hobo guys, Red Jim, Kansas City John, and Jimbo, looked after me when I continued to join them every evening, eventually bringing my own sleeping bag down. I loved sleeping outdoors, listening to the sounds of waves and the voices of their stories. I loved cooking and eating out under the stars, washing dishes with seawater and sand. This was an America I could maybe live in. I lived for a year on the beaches of Big Sur and in shacks up Palo Colorado Canyon. Life was hard. There was much disease and poverty. And I realized that I needed someplace a little more settled with maybe less cheap wine and drugs, and had heard that a group was going out to New Mexico to farm and homestead. And that sounded pretty good to me, and they invited me and Jimbo, who was living with me then, to accompany them. They took his truck, and he unfortunately was busted on an old warrant and had to stay, and I stayed with him. But eventually I found a ride on a hog farm bus that was coming to New Mexico where I could meet up with these guys. So I traveled out here on the hog farm bus that was heading to New Mexico, packed to the ceiling with food for the health food store in Santa Fe. And we arrived at the hog farm just a few days before they were all supposed to go to Woodstock to help set up and do things there. And they invited me to go with them. And I thought, oh, I'm not very good with a lot of people, and a big concert and stuff was too scary for me. I thought, no, I'm just going to hitchhike up towards Cuesta, where my friends had found some land to farm. And I put my thumb out, and a guy stopped who had a rosary and a cross in his car. And I thought, oh, thank heavens it's a priest or somebody safe. That was a big mistake. As soon as I got in the car with my puppy and my little knapsack, he made a serious grab for me, and I ended up on the side of the road. My dog had bit him to help rescue me. And a car stopped, was going to Colorado. They saw me on the road and knew something bad had been happening and offered to drive me to Cuesta. So I finally arrive in Cuesta with my little dog and my knapsack, and it's getting late in the evening, and I have about $5 in my pocket, and I'm hungry, and I go into Rael's Market and buy myself a candy bar. And there's a middle-aged woman behind the counter who asked me who I am and where I'm going, and that startled me right away, because in America, most of the stores, nobody ever asked you anything. And I told her I was looking for these friends who had a post office box in Cuesta. She asked me what were their names. And I told them their names, and when I got to the name of their child, Yusef, she went, aha, they're up at La Lama. And I said, well, where's La Lama? And she said, oh, it's 6 miles from here, way too far for you to walk, and it was starting to get to be evening. She looked at me, and I just had this amazing feeling that some angel was looking at me. And she went down the corridor of foods, and there was a guy in there shopping. And she literally grabbed him and said, hey, Mike, give this girl a ride up to La Lama. And he obeyed and said, okay, I'll take her up. She took both of my hands and looked me in the eye and said, go with Mike, you're going to be all right. So Mike drove me up to La Lama and took me to the end of the road, which was at the old Dunsmore place, and left me off there. And I never forget opening the door of this man's car and stepping out onto Lama Mountain. I put my feet on the ground and saw the most beautiful place I had ever seen, the mountains rising, the adobe buildings, a huge grassy field below me with horses wandering, and the air felt dry like Morocco almost. And for the first time in my young life, by then I had turned 18, and I just knew in my heart that I had come home. And I spent my whole life there until the Hondo fire hit, but it was a life that was physical and creative, where I used my hands, where there was community, all the things that I had missed when I had come back to this country.